What's happening, YouTube? It's Simon 466 Cards. Still a little nasally, but on the road to recovery, getting better each day. Today, I want to talk about the hobby and gambling and how they're probably more intertwined than we'd like to admit. This is based off of some thoughts that I've had in my head, but there were a couple of pieces of content that came out that really made me rethink things, and that's why I'm making this video, and I'm going to talk about those two pieces now. The first piece was on Hobby News Daily, which I'm affiliated with, and Courtney from Reckless Cards put this really great article together about gambling and the hobby, and I will link to it in the description below. Check it out. But before we get into that, let's talk about what gambling really is, and here's the definition that I found online. Gambling, the act of wagering or betting money or something of value on an event with an uncertain outcome with the intent to win more money or things of value than was wagered. So I think that is a pretty standard, non-controversial opinion or definition of what gambling is. And in this article, Courtney had a couple of lines that really stuck out to me. First one is, breaking is akin to gambling, as is ripping wax. I think that should be fairly obvious, but it's worth stating. And then she explains why. She says here, you're essentially betting that the money you spend will pay off with a big hit. The odds are rarely in your favor, and it's undeniable that just like the casino, the only sure winners from ripping wax are the card companies and breakers. And I thought, again, I'm going to link to it in the description below. I thought this was a great article by Courtney. Quick aside, Hobby News Daily is celebrating its 1-year anniversary with a live show on their YouTube channel on Saturday, March the 30th from 6 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. I'll be there for half an hour, so will Courtney. So feel free to drop by and join in on the fun. Now back to the second piece of content I was talking about. The second piece of content that I saw was from Dan the Card Man, who generally I agree with all the time. And he made a great point, and this was one of the other pieces that really got me thinking about how Fanatics and Tops is using breaking as a way to get kids in the hobby, but promoting breaking to kids is kind of like promoting gambling to kids. But the thing is, we just talked about this. Well, breaking is akin to gambling, but so is ripping wax. So is opening packs and opening boxes, right? And so while I agree with Dan's point here that breaking and promoting it to kids is kind of icky and kind of uncomfortable because it's promoting gambling to kids. Well, I mean, anytime you promote the hobby to kids in general, right, where you're talking about opening packs or opening boxes, isn't that also like promoting gambling to kids? Like, what's the difference between the two? And so that's one of the comments I put in under this video to Dan is, well, breaks are just a derivative of opening wax and packs. That's gamble. Breaks are gamble. They're both gambles. So it's kind of an awkward thing to say, but anytime you promote the hobby to kids, you're actually kind of promoting gambling, unless you're strictly focusing on the trading, collecting part of it. And his response surprised me. And just to be upfront, I respect Dan, but I think on this one, I disagree with him. Because he says, ripping wax, you're in control. I don't understand what that actually means. You get all the cards. I see breaking as a chase to get big hits, but on the contrary, opening and ripping wax is also a chase to get big hits, so I don't see the difference there. And the way it's advertised, I'm not going to speak to how the breaks are advertised, but it's sold via a click of a button. Well, you could buy a box with a click of a button too. And it's built on that dopamine chase. But so is opening a pack or a box. It's also about that dopamine chase of, did you get the big hit, the black one of one, the kaboom, the, whatever, the gold prism or whatever, right? And so even based off of Dan's comment here, I still think that ripping wax is gambling. And now I'm going to bring it back to Courtney's article earlier, where she talks about someone she knows, I don't know if it's a friend or just someone she knows, who has a gambling addiction. and basically transitioned from lottery tickets and traditional forms of gambling to the hobby. And this is word for word a quote from the article. He simply swapped scratchers and slot machines for breaks and ripping wax. He justified it all because at the end of his spending, he had a tangible, albeit often worthless item, which is you get all the cards that Dan is talking about. It's like, yeah, you get these cards. Most of the time, they're often worth nothing or next to nothing. So how does getting those cards somehow make it not gambling? And again, I want to reiterate what gambling is: the act of wagering or betting money or something of value on an event with an uncertain outcome, with the intent to win more money or things of value than was wagered. And so, to really drive this point home, I'm going to compare the cost and range of outcomes for ripping wax versus buying into a break, and how similar these two things are. So let's talk about a box of 2023 Prism basketball hobby. If you rip the wax, if you buy a box to rip it, it'll cost you $900. If you buy into a break, and let's just assume it's a random team break, let's assume it'll be anywhere from $30 to $50, right? Because 900 divided by 30 NBA teams, $30. You know, some breakers charge a little bit more to make some money. So then let's call that $50 per spot, right? And the worst case scenario is if you are ripping wax and you just completely skunk out, you don't even get an auto, because that's a thing that can happen. You probably, worst case scenario is you get $40 worth of cards. Basically, you get nothing of value, maybe a rookie or something, maybe a decent parallel. But like, if you really do poorly, $40 worth of cards. If you buy into a break, worst case scenario is you skunk out, you don't hit anything, you get $0 worth of cards. Now let's talk about the best case scenario. The best case scenario from 2023 Prism basketball is you get the Victor Wembanyama Black 1 of 1. That's the best case scenario. And so if you compare these two situations and these two scenarios, there's not that much difference. And here is a chart that illustrates it. You actually can't tell, but I created a little bar for $40 worth of cards to show the difference in terms of the worst case scenario versus the worst case scenario over here, which is 0. But it's so tiny and irrelevant both to the cost, $900 to buy the box, and also the upside of $1 million, that it fundamentally isn't that different. And so that's why, to me, there isn't any real tangible difference between breaking and ripping wax. They're both gambling. Unless you're a diehard collector that you're buying just to collect, in which case I would just say buy the singles. But in this case, if you're just looking at dollar amounts, they're both gambling. And that leads to the very uncomfortable truth about the hobby and gambling. I will not repeat this definition of gambling for you. I've already done it twice, maybe 3 times. But let's break down the different parts of gambling, or the different parts of the hobby, and how they basically are reflected in each part of the hobby. First one, ripping wax. We talked about it. That's gambling. Buying into breaks. We talked about it. That's gambling. Grading. That's a gamble, right? You think you know what grade is most likely, but we've seen many a video where a card comes back with a higher or lower grade than expected. Someone cracks it, resubmits it, and then they get a different grade, right? I would say grading is a gamble because it's the act of wagering or betting money or something of value, i.e. your raw card, on an event with an uncertain outcome, i.e. the grade, with the intent to win more money or things of value, i.e. a PSA 10 or a BGS 9.5 to BGS 10, whatever, that was wagered. So to me, grading also a gamble, although it's a little bit more of informed gambling. And then lastly, the entire singles secondary market is a gamble. And if you don't think it is, then why did these two videos that came out within like a week of each other, a few days of each other, why are these videos possible unless the singles secondary market is a gamble? And so that's why I'm saying there's an uncomfortable truth about the hobby and gambling, because if a lot of time we're talking about the kids and the hobby, well, then you're kind of talking about the kids and gambling, and that's really uncomfortable because there's just so much gambling inherent in the hobby. And I think Dan the Card Man's point is right. It's that all this marketing towards kids is usually done in terms of focusing on the gambling aspect. And that's really uncomfortable to talk about. And it's something that it's hard to wrap your head around, and it's just an icky feeling when you think about it in that sense. But there is one way that we can market to kids, right? And that's to focus on the collecting aspect. There is no gambling to that, right? If you're talking about collecting teams, sets, players, cool design cards, whatever, inserts, if you focus more on that for kids, that's less icky. That's more palatable. That's more fun, to be totally honest. And focus less on the value of cards to kids, then you can get to a place where, okay, talking about the hobby and kids is not as icky. Whether or not we're able to do that as a hobby, I'm not sure, and I have my doubts, to be honest. But there is a pathway there. Now, I'm not done talking about this topic, because next time on my next video, I'm going to talk about the big difference between the junk wax era and the junk slab era, and how it will impact future generations. I would love to hear your thoughts and comments on this video. Again, shout out to Courtney and the article she wrote on Hobby News Daily. I will link to it in the description below, as well as Dan the Card Man's video. Thank you as always for listening and watching. I will talk to you all soon. Cheers.